great. Thanks everyone for coming. I want to see how many non-Jews are in the room. Can you get a show of hands? Wow, love that. Love that. We're a small tribe. We're like 2% of the U.S. population, so we need you guys. No pressure. We need the non-Jews to hang in there with us. Claire and I are both Jewish. We also, as our guests of honor saw tonight, we have a Christmas tree in our house, so that was a nice welcome for Reed. We're not particularly religious, but we care deeply about Israel and supporting Israel, and we feel like this is important for everyone to get an education on what's going on. There's so much misinformation out there these days, like just across social media, mainstream media, elected officials across the board. So I felt like this is important just to get some basic facts out there, and hope everyone enjoys the presentation.
I'm just saying this feels like a little bit like our wedding, because it's so nice to see people from all walks of life join together for this important reason. I just want to thank our co-hosts, Lindsay Levine, Erica and Bob Junasia, whoever they are, and Andrew and Jordan Turner. Thank you so much for your partnership on this. And without further ado, I want to welcome Uri Goldflam. He joins us from just outside Jerusalem, where he lives with his family. Uri is a former paratrooper in the IDF, which is the Israeli Defense Forces, where he continued to serve in the reserves for 20 years following. And he now uses his expertise in history and geography and religions in the area to educate groups like this one all over the country and all over the world. And we are honored to welcome him to our home this evening and to here as well this afternoon. So please join me in welcoming Uri.
Thank you so much, Alice and Claire. This is really amazing. It's an honor to be here, and I thank you also for taking your time out of your many holiday parties this week to spend an evening here. And it really is amazing also to see that there's so many people here who care not only about Israel but about your community and your friends, to come out and learn about the issues. I just want to say that my goal here tonight is not to answer all questions, although there will be time for questions, lots of questions. My goal is to provide some clarity, or maybe even clarity that will allow more questions. But the point is to try to get to uncover some of the unknown unknowns to make them known unknowns. So at least we know what are the right questions to ask. The issues that are facing us today are sometimes simple and sometimes very, very complex. It's very hard to deliver or to give a full, deep explanation on a 40-second segment on your national news. And that is also why so much information gets lost and so much information gets misrepresented by the time it reaches your screen. I've been traveling through the United States for the past year. My day job is as a tour guide. I work as a guide for visiting groups, delegations, families, churches, synagogues, business people, you name it, when they visit Israel. And on October 8th last year, I realized that it's not going to be possible for me to tell Israel's story at home for the foreseeable future. And so I decided to try to tell Israel's story abroad. And I left already in November with some friends that we planned together a trip. And what I found is a thirst for information, a thirst for knowledge, and also a lot of support for Israel that was quiet and shy. Because there's a lot of people that support Israel, but don't always know why. Whether it's because of religious reasons, or because of geopolitical reasons, or simply because they understand that the democracy fighting for its life, and jihadists who behead and burn and rape and pillage and kill are very different from one another. But that intuition often is very hard to express when all the accusations and the images that come out from the war are so terrible. And so most people choose to remain silent, which is understandable. What I'd like is to create enough clarity and raise enough questions and answers so people feel more comfortable not to be silent. To do that, we need to kind of expand the view. What I'd like to do is start with a little bit of geography, a little bit of history, before we get into the event of October 7th and the aftermath of the war. There will be time for questions, and I want you to ask me the hard questions. The questions that make it difficult to talk about this conflict. The questions that make it sometimes question your own internal intuition or your own support for Israel. Right, so let's raise those questions, let's face them, and let's see how we can, with 3 or 4 hours, I'll send you home before midnight. Let's start with the region and the map. A map of the Middle East, which is a strange name because it's not in the middle and not in the east. Why is it called the Middle East? So this whole area over here is somewhere between the British Isles over here and India over there. So for the British, everywhere in the middle on their journey to the east was the Middle East. But there's very little about these countries that are connected. Iran and Morocco are extremely, very, very different. Different languages, different cultures, even different faiths. And so we continue to call this region the Middle East, even though, again, not in the middle, not in the least. What do they have? This little country over here, Turkey, used to be the empire that controlled this whole area. The Ottoman Empire is the major world global force that controlled this territory for 400 years until 1917. 1917, the end of World War I, is also the end of the Age of Empires. Not just the Ottoman Empire, the British Empire, the Russian Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. All these empires are now losing their power and their control over territories and colonies. And what we have is a creation of nation states. Countries are organizing around a new, well, not so new, maybe 100 years old, a new concept of political organization, which is the nation state. Similar ethnicity, similar history, similar territory, and acknowledged borders. That's kind of what nation states are, including the ability to defend those borders. And these nation states are organizing all over after the end of World War I and between the wars, a process of decolonization, and Israel is not different. This tiny little area over here, in the middle of the whole territory that was the Ottoman Empire, was allocated for 2 states, one Jewish and one Arab. But we'll get to that later. How small? This small. Okay, it's very important to kind of understand the size. Now, most of this part in Israel is desert. Okay, so even though it seems that Connecticut will cover, I think you can fold Israel and put like almost most of it inside Connecticut. That's how small Israel is, and all different countries, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, that surround it. In 1917, the British and the French decided to divide the dead Ottoman Empire into areas of control. An agreement called Sykes-Picot in 1950, 1916. New territories are created. In 1920, the League of Nations gives the French and the British the mandate to rule Palestine and Mesopotamia. These 2 regions were supposed to be prepared for statehood by the British and the French. Now, the British weren't sure they were going to win the war. Actually, they were quite concerned that the war is not going their way, and they needed allies wherever they could find them. A gentleman by the name of Chaim Weizmann, who was a chemist in London, he synthesized nitroglycerin and was able to the British to rearm themselves with explosives. He had very nice contacts among the higher echelons of the British High Command and government. Suggested that maybe they want to get the support of world Jewry, whatever that means. I don't even know what that means. I don't think he knew what that meant. But the British thought they did, and so they decided in 1917 to issue a declaration. Most Jews, Chaim Weizmann told them, he was not correct, but that didn't matter, support the idea of a Jewish homeland. They're Zionists. That's what Zionism means. And so the British government issued a Balfour Declaration. Lord Balfour, the British Foreign Minister, His Majesty's government sees favorably the establishment of a Jewish homeland, not a state. Where? In Palestine. This is Palestine. Both this, what became Israel, and Jordan, was the region that was known as Palestine. It's the Roman name given to the territory about 1800 years ago, and the name that stuck mostly by Europeans and was used to rename that territory. Without, back to the Balfour Declaration, without taking away from the rights and privileges of other minorities and ethnicities in the area. What are the Jews thinking? What are they imagining? A homeland where? Palestine. At the same time, the British are having a conversation with the Arabs from the Hijaz, from Arabia, which is here. It wasn't called Saudi Arabia yet. The sheriff of Mecca, the largest tribe and most influential tribe, was a gentleman by the name of Hussein. Okay, and Hussein was a Hashemite, a Bedouin tribe called the Hashemites. And Hussein saw Lawrence of Arabia. Remember that Peter O'Toole, Omar Sharif? Tomorrow we take Aqaba. Okay, so that one. They had a deal, or they made a deal. You guys help us defeat the Ottomans. This is what the British are telling the Arabs of Arabia from Mecca. You help us defeat the Ottomans, and we will give you a kingdom. Where? In Palestine. They make the same promise to the Jews and to the Arabs, and then they'll spend the next 30 years trying to undo the mess that they've created. They will fail. In 1920, the British make do on their promise to the Arabs and create the Emirate of Transjordan. They'll give, sorry to go back to here, they'll give Abdallah the kingdom of Transjordan. They'll give Faisal, his brother, the kingdom of Syria. The French are not going to like that, and they're going to kick him out of Syria to Iraq. So now both Transjordan and Iraq. Why Transjordan? Because this is the Jordan River, and this is beyond the Jordan River, Transjordan. So now Transjordan and Iraq are both Hashemite kingdoms. And what's left of the mandate of Palestine is what's west of the River Jordan, this whole area. But fast forward, 20s and 30s, Jewish immigration, Arab immigration, riots and clashes, and World War II and the Holocaust and illegal immigration, and now the British have had enough. The British by 1947 don't want to play anymore. And so they go to now the UN, not the League of Nations, and they say, we're done. Here, now it's your problem. We're giving the mandate back. Lord Bevan, who's now the foreign minister, stands up in the parliament in London. Bevan was not known to be a very friendly minister to the Jewish people. He's actually known to be quite an anti-Semite. But he stands up in the parliament in London and he says the following, and I'm paraphrasing. We have come to the conclusion that the conflict between the Arabs and the Jews in Palestine is intractable. You see, Bevan says at the parliament, we thought that we can create two national movements, or that we have two national movements, that can create two states that will live side by side. But we came to the conclusion that's not true, because what we have here are two groups with two very different organizing principles. I want you to remember this concept, organizing principle. The Jews have an organizing principle, the Zionists have an organizing principle of establishing a Jewish state. The Arabs have an organizing principle of preventing the Jews from having a state. And when this is the organizing principle of these two warring communities, it's not solvable. If it were a territorial problem, that's solvable. If they're both trying to create a state and we're just arguing about where to draw the border between them, that's solvable. But that's not what we're talking about, so we're out. The UN sends a delegation over to Palestine. They traverse the land, they go to where all the centers of populations are, and they decide that they're going to partition the land to a Jewish and Arab states. Nobody calls it, by the way, Israel yet. That's a name that's not been thought up. Or Palestine. Palestine is the regional name for the region, not for the state. So this will become the Arab state, the blue will become the Jewish state. Resolution 181 from November 29th, 1947. The Jews accept, the Arabs reject, and a war breaks out. A civil war between the Jews and the Arabs in Palestine. The British are still here. Resolution 181 never went into effect. Neither were its borders, and it became irrelevant. That civil war will become an all-out war with an invasion of 5 Arab armies within 6 months. The British set a date. They're going to leave on May 15th. The day before, the Jewish leadership gets together to announce, to declare a state. And the all-out war begins the next day. Now, contrary to popular belief, the UN doesn't create states. The states are created when a people declare statehood and then are able to defend the borders. That's how states are created. And that's what happened here. And when that state was created, it first of all took the borders of the British mandate, but right away was invaded by 5 Arab armies in continuation to the civil war that's going on inside the land. The war between the Arabs and the Jews in 1948 that the Arabs lost. And they lost big time. They lost the Galilee, this area over here, to Israel. The Arabs from here either fled to Lebanon, they ran away from the war, or stayed and became Israeli citizens. The Arabs lost this territory to Transjordan. Transjordan invaded the newborn state of Israel, captured the mountainous area over here, what the Bible calls Judea and Samaria, including all the holy sites in Jerusalem. And then the Transjordan kingdom decided to annex that mountain area to Transjordan, changing the name from Transjordan to Jordan with an East Bank and a West Bank. That's where the name comes from. West Bank is the Jordanian designation to this territory, an annexation which the international community did not accept, but Jordan continued to occupy this territory, and the Arabs living here became Jordanian subjects. The Arabs also lost what was supposed to be the southern canton to Egypt. Egypt took over what will become the Gaza Strip, and will continue to occupy that area for the next 19 years. They didn't bother annexing, they just kept the territory and ruled it as a platform to attack Israel in the future. That attack came in 1973, we'll get to that in a minute. But these borders will remain until 1967. In 67, there is another war, and this time Israel triples in size. In 1967, the Six-Day War is a war that gave Israel for the very, very first time a sense of self-confidence, a sense of assurance, a sense that we're not the small, tiny underdog surrounded by enemies about to be defeated and killed at any moment, which was what people believed would happen. The 3 weeks before the war started in 1967, people were digging up stadiums, national stadiums for cemeteries. The joke was the last person turned the light off at Ben Gurion Airport. That's it, we're done. We had a good run for 19 years. Now we're done. And lo and behold, within 6 days, we vanquished 3 Arab armies. How amazing are we? Strong, confident, capable, competent. We're able to vanquish 3 large Arab armies, well-trained, well-funded, while the world was having a weapons embargo on Israel. That gave Israel not just a sense of confidence, but also a sense of arrogance. And I know you don't believe me because none of you have ever met an arrogant Israeli. By the laughter in the room, I know how many people actually make Israeli. But the result is that Israel had room to breathe, had what we call strategic depth. Another war in 1973 as a result of that arrogance. And until last year, 1973 was the biggest intelligence failure, an operational failure in Israel's history. A terrible, terrible war. But 7 years after that, we already given up the Sinai. Sinai Peninsula was returned to Egypt in exchange for a peace treaty. This paradigm of a land for peace will be the paradigm since 1967 that Israel has always talked about with its neighbors for any kind of a peace deal. Great. Land for peace was always, since 1947. It was supposed to be 2 states, giving up land in exchange for peace. In 67, giving up land in exchange for peace. Resolution 242 in the UN, if you will. And so in 79, we give up land and we get peace from Egypt and we deploy on the internationally recognized border. The Gaza Strip and the West Bank remain under Israeli occupation. We also capture for the first time the Golan Heights, a very strategically elevated volcanic plateau. And now for the first time, there are guns still on the mountain, but this time those guns are pointing to Damascus. Right? So this is the situation in Israel that brings us to the 1980s. There's economic problems, there is a war in Lebanon, there is Palestinian terrorism. There's a lot going on in the 1980s. The first Intifada, an uprising among the Palestinians. Like until then, Israelis thought, how amazing are we? We are the most wonderful occupiers in the world. We built them hospitals and roads and raised their income and their health metrics. They're better off than all the other Arabs in all the other world. We're really amazing. That's how amazing we are. The only thing we didn't do is give them political rights. And so that was a clash that was brewing for a very long time. Erupted in 1987, was called the first Intifada. That leads to Oslo in 93. 93 is when we signed the first memorandum of understanding and mutual recognition between the PLO as the official legitimate representative of the Palestinian people and the state of Israel. The idea in Oslo was to begin a process that will end with the establishment of 2 states living side by side. Right? One will give up territory and receive peace. The idea was that since we can't talk about the big issues, every time we start to talk about the big issues, the main core issues of the conflict, borders, security, Jerusalem, settlements, refugees, the talks would blow up. We couldn't agree on even getting close. So in Oslo, they decided, which is a very good way, or European way, Western way of solving problems, let's start with the little things. Let's kick the can down the road on the big things, and let's start with the little things. Let's decide on sewage, on tariffs and trade, on taxes. Let's talk about labor laws. Let's talk about radio frequencies. Let's talk about the things that we can talk about. Let's establish state institutions, a bank, a parliament for the Palestinians, a judicial system. And in 5 years' time, there will be enough to lose on both sides, enough trust on both sides, that we'll be able to reach a compromise on the big issues. That was the idea. It had a majority support within Israel, in the public. In the parliament, there was one hand more than the opposition. It was 61 to 59. And it passed. And the Oslo process began, and it raised problems from both sides. In 1995, an Israeli extremist assassinated Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin because of this process. But at the same time, Hamas introduced the bus bombs. The buses blowing up. Dozens of people were being murdered in order to wash those streets with blood, to stop the process from continuing. It came to be so difficult that in 2000, Prime Minister then Ehud Barak got together with Bill Clinton and Yasser Arafat at Camp David. We're now in September 2000, and decided to hammer out a final agreement to conclude the Oslo process. That Oslo process was falling apart, although the Palestinians already received their territory. There was an autonomy, there was a Palestinian Authority, a pseudo-state. But things were not ending the way they wanted to. They said enough is enough. Bill Clinton presents Yasser Arafat with a plan. It's very, you can see it on social media now. Bill Clinton is all over talking about this now, how he became a failure as a president because Yasser Arafat made him one. Because he presented Yasser Arafat with pretty much a whole list of his demands. Everything. In exchange, Arafat had to sign it's the end of the conflict. They got the territory, they got the settlements removed, they got their own even authority over Jerusalem. But then he walked away. Because Yasser Arafat, remember the organizing principle we talked about earlier? We forgot. We, when I say we in the West, in Israel, we forgot about these organizing principles. But Arafat didn't. We have one side who wants to build a state, and the other side who wants to prevent Israel from having a state. Signing that this is the end of the conflict is against the organizing principle of Yasser Arafat, and so he walked away. And instead of coming back with a counter proposal, you all remember the suicide bombers, the restaurants, the drive-by shooting, and I wish this was the worst thing I would be talking about today. If you were planning to come to Israel between 2000 and 2005, I would have told you don't come, because it's too dangerous. The second intifada, and I will hear this word a lot, intifada, chaos, uprising, was the worst terror wave that Israel has ever suffered. It pretty much killed what is today we call the Labor Party, the Peace Party, the idea of land for peace. This is where most of it went out the window. There are very few people who continue to support this idea after the second Intifada. But this word is heard now in many demonstrations that you hear in college campuses. There is only one solution: Intifada, revolution. I'm willing to bet that most people who are shouting this chant don't know what it means. Just like they don't know what river and what sea they're referring to when they're shouting about to the river to the sea. But what does it mean? This is what it means. This is what they want to bring to the world and to American streets. To prevent this, to stop this, Israel built a physical barrier and took over many of the territory that had already evacuated. So we built a physical barrier to prevent would-be suicide bombers from entering Israel. And we also incurred into the Palestinian territories where terror cells had set up. Both these things combined enabled us to see at this point, we were talking about late 2002 to 2003, a dramatic decrease in successful terror attacks and an increase in all the interceptions. By 2005, Yasser Arafat dies in 2004. His replacement, Mahmoud Abbas, decides against the Intifada. He said, this is not bringing us any good PR, so we're ending this, and so we won that war. But in 2005, we still have the issue of the Gaza Strip, which brings me to where we are today. The Gaza Strip is the area we saw close to the Egyptian border, and so we share a border with Egypt. In 2005, there's still about 20 Israeli communities inside the Gaza Strip. We're talking about 10,000 people and almost the same number of soldiers to protect them, living among roughly 2 million at the time, 2 million Palestinian Arabs. And Ariel Sharon, our prime minister at the time, decided that's not going to work for us anymore. Let's comply with the international community's demand to remove those settlements from the Gaza Strip, redeploy on the internationally recognized border. Remember, this is internationally recognized border. This area here is Israel since 1948. It's not disputed territory. We'll also remove 4 settlements from the West Bank to show our seriousness that we're willing and able to do that for peace. And all the Palestinians had to do was take this opportunity to turn the Gaza Strip into a Singapore on the Mediterranean. We took out the people, the cemeteries, the living and the dead. We removed all their houses, but we kept the industrial and agricultural infrastructure intact. All they need to do was flip a switch. Within a week, they could be exporting cherry tomatoes and strawberries and tulips to Holland. But they destroyed all of it in 4 days and turned many of these communities into terror bases. The response was the beginning of instead of attacking the Jewish settlements inside the Gaza Strip, they started attacking outside the Gaza Strip with missiles. In 2005, we pulled out. In 2006, the Palestinians had elections where Hamas won 75% of the vote. This is not me saying so. This is Jimmy Carter, who was the overseer of these elections, and he said they're fair and square. He wrote back then that he was still surprised. He did not expect Hamas to win 75% of the vote. Because everybody knows, this is Jimmy Carter saying, not me, that Hamas are a rejectionist organization. That Hamas is an organization that rejects peace, that rejects the existence of Israel. How could it be that the Palestinians, who are supposed to be peace-loving and wanting to coexist with Israel, will choose a majority over Hamas? And that is a question that was not answered, or was answered, but it was answered wrongly. We'll talk about that in a moment. In 2007, Hamas stages a violent coup and takes over the Gaza Strip. They take the Palestinian Authority, the PLO, Mahmoud Abbas's people, throws them off rooftops, shoots people in the street. It's the first time the Palestinians are running away to Israel from other Palestinians. And the result is a takeover of the Gaza Strip by Hamas. First, it's a ragtag group of terrorists, or it looks like it, but very quickly it becomes like Nuremberg. Now, when Hamas takes over the Gaza Strip, they take over the entire Gaza Strip. They take over the schools. They take over the social structures. They take over the UN organizations. They take over the border crossings. They take over the trade. They start charging protection money to bring things in and out. They take over the mosques. They take over the youth movements. And they start to indoctrinate the population with their specific brand of radical Islamic ideology. Now, who is this organization and what do they believe in? Hamas is the Palestinian branch of the Islamic Brotherhood. Islamic Brotherhood is a global organization started in Egypt. It's a Sunni Muslim organization whose goal is to create a global Muslim caliphate. And that's one of the biggest mistakes that we in the West make when we're thinking about Hamas. Many people in the West think about Hamas as another Palestinian faction, a radical Islamic group that want to create a free Palestine alongside or rival to the PLO, who also want to create a free Palestine. That's a mistake. Hamas is not interested in a free Palestine. It's only a first stage to a global caliphate. It's a transnational organization, and their goal is a global revolution. Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam obliterates it as it had obliterated its predecessors. It's not me saying so, this is their words. You can look it up online, it's the Hamas Charter from 1988. I found this on Yale University Avalon Project, and you can find many historical documents, this one too. And I recommend that you look it up and read, just to get an idea of who these people are. This is in their words. It's not me saying this about them. This is how they define themselves. How do they achieve this? By killing all the Jews. All right? It's very simple. The Jews, according to their charter, if you read it, it's a combination of the protocols of the elders of Zion and Mein Kampf. It's a kind of like all the problems of the world are on the heads of the Jews. The Jews are responsible for the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution, and they control the banks, and they control the media, and the Freemasons, and your Rotary clubs, and this cabal of evildoers who want to rule the world. And this is how it's defined over there, from the Hadith, from the Quranic interpretations. Find the Jews and kill them wherever they are, not just in Palestine. Allah is the goal, Prophet the model, Quran the constitution, jihad its path, and death for the case of Allah its most sublime belief. I want to pause on this for a second, because this is one of the biggest problems that we in the West, and I include Israel in this, have a very difficult time in grasping about this very radical ideology that we call jihadism, or radical Islam. And I want to make a caveat, because this does not include all Muslims. The majority of Muslims do not ascribe to this ideology. In fact, most of the Muslims I know, my colleagues and friends who are Muslim, are really kind and good people, which I am happy to be friends and neighbors and colleagues with. Only about 30% of Muslims around the world, according to different research, depending who you ask, 25 to 35, let's just settle on 30, are ascribed to this radical ideology. There are 1.5 billion Muslims in the world. 30% is a lot of people. But it's not everyone. Okay, so that's a very, very important caveat, which is very important for me to make. The idea of the radical Islamists, the jihadists, that this world, about this world, is that this world is only a shell. It is a shadow. It is not even a beginning of life itself. It's a necessary transition, but life begins at death. Our goal is to get, death is the goal. The goal is to get to the afterlife. And if you get to the afterlife, in the right conditions, you get to hang out with the Prophet and hug the bosom of Allah. What's the best way to get to paradise? If you're innocent. Now, who among us is innocent? Really? I'm asking this a real question. Who among us is innocent? Children. The little ones, yes. What does that mean about reaching heaven? That if the children die or the children are killed, they go straight to paradise. They got a free ticket. You've just done them a favor. Remember, life begins at death. And this is a concept that's very hard for us to grasp, because we believe, that's how we grew up, that's how we were taught, that people around the world, no matter what creed or color or faith or culture, want what we want for our children, which is a safe and healthy upbringing, which is education and a warm bed and a full belly, which is soccer practice and dance recitals. That's what everybody wants for the children, no? Well, no. Because life here is meaningless. It's only life after death which holds meaning. And this is what they say about themselves. It's not my words. What's the next best way to get to paradise? If you're not innocent, you're not a child. If you're a martyr. Martyrdom, the idea of dying for the glory of Allah as a martyr, gives you the entry ticket to paradise. And if you have the blood of the infidel on your hands, even better. Remember that gesture, holding up the hands, the bloodied hands? Some people in Hollywood made a pin out of that to think that that's something good. That's just a ceasefire, stop. But the bloody hands is a symbol of the blood of the infidel that gives me the ticket to paradise. Have you ever wondered how a ISIS suicide bomber can walk into a mosque in Pakistan, blow himself up killing 200 Muslims in prayer and consider that to be a good thing? Because he's just done them a favor. There was one or two people he wanted to kill who he thought were infidels. All the others, he's just done them a favor. He just sent them to paradise. 90% of terrorism occurs in Muslim countries. They're the first and most to suffer from this ideology. Again, their words, not mine. The idea that Hamas is just another liberation organization that is trying to free itself from some imagined or real colonization of Western power is a Western belief. This is not what they say about themselves. And that brings me to October 7th. A lot of people will say, well, something really bad had to have happened to the Palestinians in order for them to carry out these terrible things. The truth is that that's what they wanted to do from the beginning. Okay, the territory around the Gaza Strip was not disputed territory. In fact, most of the people living in those kibbutz communities were the most radical peace activists in Israel who were talking about coexistence. The events of October 7th were on a magnitude that never before was experienced in Israel, and the worst atrocities against Jews since the Holocaust. Now, I'm not going to stay here and describe them because that's not what we hear. But there are already people who are denying it happened. There are already people who are denying it happened already on October 8th. On October 8th, there were already people who were calling Israel's response a genocide. This is before Israel began its response. Israel began its response 3 weeks later. But on October 8th, they were already talking about this. There was a prepared, pre-planned event that was also broadcasted on social media by their own devices, their GoPros and body cams, to share with the world. Now I want you to take out your phones and take a picture of the screen. And after you do that, you will put that photograph in the hidden file of your phone, because you're not allowed to look at these websites. This is not websites I'm allowing you to look at. Except this one, the first one, Screams Before Silence. So our documentary on YouTube doesn't have any graphic images, but it's a very, very important documentary that talks about what happened on that day. It's often forgotten by the world. But all these other ones, this one is even not allowed in Israel. If you click this on a computer in Israel, it'll tell you not found. You're not allowed to access it. These websites contain the testimonies and the documentation from October 7th. And it's terrible. It'll give you nightmares, so don't watch it, please. The only time you pull this out of your phone is when you meet somebody who told you, who will tell you, who might tell you, oh, it didn't happen. They're exaggerating. They're lying. You know what? Yeah, maybe some people were killed, but it was an Israeli false flag operation. They did it to themselves. You give them an excuse to go into Gaza. So again, we're seeing here Holocaust denial in real time as it unfolds. We're not going to wait 70 years for it. It's happening right now. These, and of course the most difficult thing, which is still painful in Israel today, the hostages. Especially the kids. Now, Kfir and Eitan Bibas are still being held. He was 9 months old when he was kidnapped, and Eitan was 4 years old when he was kidnapped. And they're still there. We don't know if they're alive or dead. The kidnapping of children, the kidnapping of the elderly, people out of their beds, and the atrocities that they endured over there is what has caused Israelis the highest level of pain, and still does. People ask me if Israelis are in post-trauma or suffer from PTSD. The truth is they're not in the post yet. This is not post-trauma, this is trauma unfolding. In Israel, there is a ticker on my website, you can see it also. the 438th day of October 23. It's reliving the event on a continual basis, and still until those 100 people are returned home, the war won't be over. Not for Israel, at least. But this event had such monumental impact. It's an event that I call a paradigm-shifting event. Nothing that was before the war or before October 6th will happen after October, will continue after October 7th. And it's true on several levels. I'm going to go quickly because I want to get to where we are today. For Israelis, remember we talked about 1947, Israel's War of Independence. We were fighting for our lives. After 67, many Israelis thought that we're okay. We got our territory, we got our strategic depth. We're now fighting about territory. Where will we draw the border? It's not a question of if Israel will exist. Israel exists, and we're strong, no problem. We're now arguing about where to put the border. Right? Remember, Land for Peace. We woke up on October 7th to realize that no, we are still fighting about existence. If this were a war about borders, it would have been settled already. Remember the organizing principle. I'm going back to that. No matter how many times I like to make fun of the British a lot for everything they've done and didn't do, but this they got right. So we now realize that we're in an existential war, still fighting for our lives. And the data shows that the Palestinians are on the same page. They were on that page ordered back in 2006 with the elections. They voted in Hamas. They know how to read Arabic. They know what Hamas stands for. Jimmy Carter was surprised, but they weren't. Because Israelis now realize, look, these are the numbers of the increase in the support for Hamas, both in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. Shockingly, the West Bank has a larger increase for Hamas than in Gaza. There's a popular statement that I hear often by diplomats and world leaders who are talking about Hamas as bad. Hamas, terror organization, bad. And then there's the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people, good. Okay, and they make a very sharp distinction between those two things. That's a great sentiment, and I wish it was true. But there's no data to support this argument. The contrary. What the data shows is not just that Hamas is not separate from the Palestinian people, but Hamas is a legitimate expression of Palestinian opinions and beliefs and ideologies and culture. Hamas didn't show up from outer space to take over the Gaza Strip. Hamas grew up within the Gaza Strip. On the regional level, we see that Iran has showed its hand. Iran activated its proxies. You hear this word a lot on the news. Hezbollah, the Houthis, Iranian proxies, but this is what it looks like. For 40 years, Hamas has built a ring of fire, that's what they called it, around Israel. And its purpose was twofold. One, to prevent Israel from attacking Iran's nuclear program. Because if Israel dared to do that, they would rain rockets on Israel and kill a lot of people. And two, to build a nuclear program so they can actually destroy Israel. Not for destroying Israel itself. That's only the first stage of the plan. The Iranians themselves, again, this is the words they use themselves about themselves, talk about Israel as a small devil and America as the big devil. By taking Israel out of the equation, they do two things. One, they remove a stumbling block to go west. And two, they get the whole Muslim army behind them in their attempts to go west. Israel's only the appetizer. Who's the main event?
You.
We'll talk about, and this is what it looks like. We'll talk about that later on. This is what it looks like on April 13th. 300 rockets, drones, ballistic missiles were fired at Israel. The largest single attack against any country in modern history of its kind, of ballistic missiles thankfully with the help of our allies, the United States, Britain, Russia, France, and even the Saudi Arabia and Jordan, we managed to thwart the majority of those attacks. Which brings us to the global issue. You can think that the battle is between Israel and Iran. This battle is not, well, it's happening far in the Middle East, and people have interest in it, academic interest, or even emotional if they know somebody in Israel. But not everybody understands the relevance to our lives here today. I have a friend and colleague, Matty Friedman, who wrote several books, Pumpkin Flowers and Leonard Cohen in '73 and a bunch of others. But he's Canadian, and he likes to ask his audience, has anybody heard of the Canada-Italy War of 1940? Did you? No? There were Canadian troops fighting Italian fascists in Italy in 1940. How come have you not heard about this war? Because it was World War II. Because the Canadian-Italian conflict in 1940 was only a small parcel of a much larger conflict that we call today World War II. So the war between Israel and Hamas, Israel-Hezbollah, is not a war between Israel, Hamas, and Israel and Hezbollah. At the very least, it's a war between Israel and Iran, at the very least. But I would argue that what Israel is to Iran, Ukraine is to Russia, and Taiwan is to China, and Japan and South Korea are to North Korea. What we're looking at is a new global order which is emerging. And the questions we have to ask ourselves, I'm really glad everybody, or most people that I meet in America support Israel. That's very heartwarming. But that's not the issue. It's not about Israel. It's the question is, in what world will our children and grandchildren grow up? Who is giving the tone? Is it the despots, the tyrants, the dictators and autocrats that support jihad and chaos and the subjugation of women and the subjugation of minorities, religious and gender minorities? Who's setting the tone? Is it them, or as flawed as they are, Western democracies and their allies, because there are countries, for example, in Africa, in North America, and in North Africa, and even in the Middle East, that want to be part of the Western sphere of influence. Again, as flawed as they are, and they are, but they truly do promote the values of liberty and freedom and protection of minorities and equality between men and women and religious freedoms. To understand what a world would look like, look around you. Jews and Christians and non-others are sitting here in this room together. Their Christmas decorations, their Hanukkah decorations. This cannot occur here. It just can't. It doesn't. If it could, it would. There's one Christian society which is growing and thriving in the Middle East. One. And that's the Christian society that's in Israel. And that's the final level of analysis that I want to share with you. The October 7th atrocities and their aftermath seem to have ripped the mask, the band-aid, or the cover of a very thinly veiled civility in the world, and allowed the expression of anti-Semitism to rise up again. It's now popular, it's now trendy, it's not okay to openly hate Jews. This is from a demonstration in Poland. She's a Dutch 5th-year medical student. Do you think she thinks of herself as a good person? I think she does. She's happy, she's joyful, and she wants to keep the world clean from Jews. Oh, sorry. No, not Jews. Only Zionists. Just turns out that 95% of Jews are Zionists. Zionism is the aspiration, the belief that Jews deserve to have a state of their own. That's it. That's it. It's been usurped, it's been stolen, it's been redefined and weaponized today. But if you believe that Jews have a right for independent state, welcome to the club. You're a Zionist. But this sleight of hand, this bait and switch, is an attempt to be able to be anti-Semitic in polite company. I'm not against Jews, I'm just against Zionists. Got nothing against Jews, only against Israel. Which brings me to, well, we'll talk about, maybe at the end I'll make another comment about anti-Semitism, what you can do. I want to spend a few minutes to tell you where we are now, where the war is now, because this is what you hear in the news like these days. And then we'll get to the final part of how it's expressed in the media. This is the borders of Gaza. Egypt is over here, the Mediterranean Sea. Israel, you can see the agricultural areas, all the towns that were attacked on the 7th are around here. Israel today is, the IDF is holding what you see here in orange. These are current IDF positions. What you see in yellow are positions IDF used to have and then pulled out from. The ones without color are where the IDF did not operate, and those are generally now the humanitarian zones. That's where Gaza's 2.5 million people are now concentrated in these areas, and their conditions are terrible. Their conditions are terrible and crowded. What it seems like, and I say this carefully because I don't represent the government of Israel. I don't sit in the room where it happens and then make decisions, and nobody calls me to consult. So far. But this is from the what we see in the news, what we see from the analysis of positions, and the general understanding of what's happening now. The idea, this is a large swath of what we call the Netzarim corridor, about 5 kilometers wide, which is entirely under Israeli control, as the northern quadrant over here. And the idea is to create here a Hamas-free zone. And that's an important point. You see, for Israel, remember, go back to what Hamas is and its jihadi intent. If Hamas stays on its feet, when Israel ends the war and pulls out, it was all for nothing. The idea is for October 7th never to happen again, then whoever rules Gaza in the future must be a body that does not subscribe to the jihadi ideology. And if Hamas is allowed to continue to exercise its power in Gaza the day after Israel pulls out, then it's just a matter of time before Israel has to go back in again. And all the investment in its rebuilding and the financial investments and the social investments and whatever you want that to rebuild Gaza will go down the drain again in a few years' time when there's another round. And for several months, Israel's been trying to find somebody to do that. First, we thought that we can have the local leadership, tribal leaders or village leaders, even crime organizations, believe it or not, that will be the alternative to Hamas. All that aid that goes into Gaza now doesn't reach the people. Hamas takes over most of those trucks, they take what they want for themselves, and then the rest they sell back. This is how they maintain control of the population. This is free aid, supposed to go in for free, but they sell it to the people. We're trying to find an alternative. When we started doing that, Hamas went in and started to decapitate and to shoot the leaders of those tribes, and they said, no, thank you, we're out. We approached the Egyptians. Egypt has a very strong interest in this game because they share a border with Gaza, but the Egyptians said, nope. And they went ahead and doubled the size of their walls and fences with the Gaza Strip. We asked the Emiratis, we tried to ask the Saudis. The answer is no and no. Nobody wants to be involved in this. Nobody wants to be seen. Even the PLO, Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, don't want to be seen as coming into the Gaza Strip rolling on Israeli tanks. And the result is that Israel is left to do it alone. We don't trust the UN. And so the only way to do this is to do it ourselves. But first, make this whole area Hamas free. If we're able to push out Hamas, first we have to clear the area from civilian population so we can properly fight Hamas without collateral damage. That's what's being done now. Most of this area, most of the people living here, Bet Lahia, Bet Hanun, Jabalia, refugee camp, Sajaiya, all these have moved down to this area over here. And now Israel is fighting. Until last week, 3 soldiers were killed here. There's fighting ongoing. But they're trying to create a Hamas-free zone. Once that occurs, we can allow people to return. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people that will be able to return to the northern third of the Gaza Strip and start rebuilding their lives without Hamas. Okay, free of Hamas. If that can work, then that will be a model for the rest of the Gaza Strip. Everything I describe here is speculation. But even if it's true, you understand already it's not going to happen tomorrow or the next week or the next month. This is a process that will take many months, even years. So if you ask me, when is the war going to be over? I don't know. First of all, until the hostages are returned, it's not going to be over. But even after the hostages are returned, God willing, soon, then we will still have to spend a significant amount of time in creating Hamas-free Gaza over here, and then continue to the southern part. So that's where we are now in the Gaza Strip. This is Rafah. This is the area that the Americans told us not to go. But this is where Yahya Sinwar was killed. This is the border, the Philadelphia corridor. And all of these areas are homes where they found tunnels and terrorism infrastructure right along the border. 180 tunnels that cross to Egypt. Some of them are big enough for trucks. It's not Hogan's Heroes that are digging with a spoon and crawling out. Okay, these are massive tunnels that moved in and out with large trucks. When the Egyptians says they didn't know, then I don't believe them. But it's just me. That's where we are in the Gaza Strip. This is in Lebanon. Israel has now captured this territory and erased many of the infrastructure in these villages. This is the border with Israel. What look like villages are actually Hezbollah strongholds. They've built into the houses and under the houses. They look like regular homes, but they're actually military platforms. When Israel moved into that area, they found stupidly large numbers of rockets and missiles and mortars and landmines and any kind of explosives that you can think about, including vehicles and vests and guns and ammunition, all ready for the day that they get the order and boom, they attack Israel in what they call Conquer the Galilee Plan. Conquer the Galilee Plan was the Hezbollah plan to have an October 7th-like attack and capture all the Israeli towns and villages over here. All right? The only difference is that Hezbollah is 10 times stronger than Hamas. Now, I know it's not, maybe it's not popular to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. By Hamas pulling the trigger on October 7th, we dodged a much bigger bullet in the north. Israel went in and captured many of these, but you also remember that Israel operated in the rest of Lebanon. And this is the area that the IDF is prohibiting right now to be returned to. This is the area that the population that fled these villages cannot return until the Lebanese army takes control. So part of the ceasefire that we had with Lebanon, this is the Litani River. Hezbollah is not allowed to go south of the Litani River. This area is supposed to be taken over by Lebanon's own army, and they're supposed to control this area. When you hear Israel attacking Lebanon and then the French are accusing Israel of violating the ceasefire, it's a complete misunderstanding of what this ceasefire is. And it's not also reported well in the news. The ceasefire, we thought until now, is that we just stop shooting at each other. That's the old paradigm. No more shooting. But what did Hezbollah do instead? Move back in and rebuild this whole infrastructure back in 2006 for the next almost 20 years, rebuild their infrastructure so they can attack Israel again. This time Israel is saying that's not going to happen. The UN was supposed to prevent them from doing it last time, UNIFIL, but they didn't. UNIFIL, I used to say, was worthless until I saw their budget. If you look up, online, it's public information. UN budget, UNIFIL, and you'll see it's cost $500 million a year for the UNIFIL forces to stay here and watch Hezbollah rebuilding. They had one job, and it cost us $500 million for them not to do that one job. So Israel's now saying that's not going to happen again, and every time Hezbollah tries to go south of Litani and reestablish itself, we enforce the ceasefire by attacking those targets. This is the village, Misajber, today, and this is the same village before the war. This is Manara, Kibbutz Manara, doesn't exist anymore. They destroyed it with missiles and rockets and anti-tank missiles, and it's pretty much all gone, but now so is this village. This is what it looks like. That's Al-Makmura, it's a smaller village, but that's pretty much what it looks like when we take out the infrastructure. What you're seeing here is explosives that were placed underground in the tunnels and in the bunkers that they have spent building since 2006. Then I'm gonna go ahead here because it's already getting late and I want to leave time for questions. But what we're looking at here is underground facility. It's a it's a UAV building facility. It's 1.4 kilometers long, 70 kilometers wide, and almost 80 meters underground. And it's on the border between Syria and Lebanon. So an opening over here, an opening over here, and this whole facility underground. We had to drop several bunker busters to get to this whole thing. It was the last day before the ceasefire. If you take out this capability. The regional impact of the defeat of Hezbollah is that the Iranian axis is broken. The defeating of Hezbollah, the weakening of Hezbollah, which was the only effective fighting force that Assad had in Syria, was utilized by the rebels and by Turkey. Turkey now pushed the rebels forward, and that caused the downfall of Assad. For Israel, it's a positive development. Assad's regime not only was a brutal, horrible, terribly cruel and murderous regime, and it's a good thing that he's gone. It was also the link between Iran and Hezbollah in Lebanon. That's how they were resupplying. By breaking this link, there is no longer the possibility for Iran to resupply Hezbollah. Lebanon itself can now re-emerge. Now, why do I say that? Because both Syria and Lebanon are not countries in the sense that we think of countries, as in a defined population in a defined territory that applies its own ability or its what's the word I'm looking for? It's escaping right now. The sole ability to exercise military power at the hand of the government, right? And so there are arenas where different forces play out. And that's what we're seeing in both Lebanon and Syria, and now we're hopeful that Lebanon will re-emerge and take control of their country. This is what Israel is now positioned. This area is the demilitarized zone, or the buffer zone between Israel and Syria. It's been a buffer zone since 1974, since the Yom Kippur War. Once Assad fell and there's no longer a Syrian army on the other side, that agreement is essentially dead. It's a dead word, it's irrelevant, because there's no Assad army on the other side. Israel took forward positions over here, inside the buffer zone, and went ahead and destroyed whatever was left of Assad's army, or his advanced capabilities. So we have now effectively neutered the ability of this new jihadi state And right now, until we learn otherwise, these guys, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is a spin-off of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Jabhat Nusra Front, still hold that ideology. It's up to them to prove otherwise. But Israel after October 7th is no longer the same Israel as before October 7th. So we'll take proactive steps to prevent that from occurring to defend the communities over here. So now we control the buffer zone, and we took away the abilities. We talk about tanks and helicopters and fighter jets and long-range missiles and chemical weapons that are now inaccessible to the jihadi forces that have taken Syria. We are still in the wait-and-see phase because Turkey is now in charge. Erdogan of Turkey is a member of Islamic Brotherhood. So we may have broken the Iranian axis, but we're now facing another Sunni axis with Qatar and Turkey involved. And again, it's a wait and see to see how this evolves. All right, so let's breathe. How do we talk about this? Because there's so many lies, misconceptions, and accusations against Israel, and sometimes it seems overwhelming and hard to break down. I call them the big three: genocide, apartheid, colonialism. And this is sometimes so overwhelming, they end the conversation. And if it's true, then Israel's position is correct. A country that commits genocide, a country that commits a regime that functions under apartheid laws doesn't have legitimacy to function. So how do we deal with this? So I'm going to go through it very, very quickly, but I can tell you now that on my website, Travel Trailer Israel, there's cards outside, and at the end on the slide, you'll find PDFs with explanations, with talking points, with questions and answers that break them down to even greater extent. First, let's talk about genocide. This is what genocide looks like, in numbers, on a graph. It's not hard to see the common criterion between all these genocides. Armenian genocide, Khmer Rouge in the 1960s and 70s, in Cambodia, the Tutsi in Rwanda, and of course, the Jews of Europe. This is what Palestinian population growth looks like. Okay, there's West Bank, Gaza, and combined. Now, genocide requires the definition of genocide. The legal definition of genocide requires the intentional destruction or the intent to destroy an entire or partially an ethnic or religious group or national group. That's how it's defined. If that's the intention, then we really suck at it. Really, we're terrible at genocide. But those are the numbers. But then you might ask me, but already this war has taken such a big toll. 40,000 people have been killed, and that's true. And it's very, very important for us to always remember that any death, especially a civilian death in war, is tragic. And I don't want to minimize them, and I don't want to belittle them at all. The way jurists, the way legal experts analyze wars is by comparing not the absolute number of people who were killed. Because people are killed in wars. Wars are fought. Some of them are worse, some of them are far worse. But wars are fought and people die. That's a reality of war. The global average of combatant to non-combatant deaths in urban warfare, the UN numbers, that out of 10 casualties, 1 is military and 9 are civilian. That's how horrible war is. 9 civilians for every single military casualty. That's the global average. The Americans did a little bit better in Iraq and Afghanistan, 1 to 5 and 1 to 4. Now, the numbers coming out of Gaza now are all numbers provided by Hamas. So let's take them with a grain of salt. There are many problems with these numbers. But even if we go with that number, which is 42,000. Israel talks about 20,000 terrorists that have been killed. So 20,000 out of those 42,000 are terrorists, which makes Israel's ratio of combatant non-combatant 1-to-1 or 1-to-1.5. Not only is Israel not guilty of genocide, not only is Israel not guilty of disproportionate use of force, but Israel has raised the bar in its ratio of combatant to non-combatant casualties in urban warfare. And all those are talking about the Gaza conflict as the worst in the world. Well, these are other conflicts in the area in the last decade or two. Many, many more by many orders of magnitude. Only now many Western journalists are realizing the horrors of the Syrian civil war. My question is, where were you until now? Israel's accused of ethnic cleansing. There were 150,000 Arabs in 1948 living in Israel. Today there's 2.5 million Arab citizens of Israel. But Jews in the Middle East have gone from almost 1 million to less. This number is lower now. This is 2012. Less than 4,000. That's what ethnic cleansing looks like. Colonialism. So I showed you. This is a mosaic of the Binding of Isaac from the Church of Holy Sepulchre. It's a little bit difficult to build the case of colonialism. Much of the accusations against Israel are founded on the belief that the Jews are white colonizers in the Middle East. Okay? Now, I started with the Binding of Isaac because the Binding of Isaac is a very, very quintessential, the definition that binds the Jewish people to the land of Israel. The definition of Judaism is a tri-covenant, God, people, land. There's no Judaism without its connection to the land of Israel. The land of Israel is the ancestral homeland of the Jewish people. Judea and Samaria is where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, etc., etc., etc. But you have to ignore all that in order to make the case for colonialism. And so I'm going to just, there is so much. This is the first mention of Israel from 1206 BC in an Egyptian stela. And there's just so much geography and archaeology and testimony. The first temple, second temple, destruction. Babylon, do you remember Boney M's song? By the waters of Babylon? By the waters of Babylon, where we sat. I know it's a very, very catchy tune, but it's a very sad story. Where we laid and wept as we remembered Zionism. For the wicked carried us away to captivity, requiring of us a song. But how can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? The Jews are in Babylon weeping for the destruction of the temple and yearning to return. Later they will say, if my right hand loses, if I forget Jerusalem, may my right hand lose its cunning. Some of them will return. Cyrus the Great, the Persian king, the King of Kings, will allow the Jews to return to Judea, where they will rebuild the temple. And then, several decades later, the Persians will be defeated by the Greeks. The Greeks will take over. Alexander the Great. The story of Hanukkah is coming up. Everybody's celebrating Hanukkah in the Western world. What is that? That's the Jews rededicating the temple in Jerusalem 2,200 years ago. It will be another 800 years before Muhammad is even born. But you're going to make the case that the Jews are colonizers in Jerusalem? You really have to work hard at ignoring history to make that case. The Second Temple, the end of the Second Temple period, the birth of Jesus in Bethlehem in Judea, a Jewish boy born to a Jewish family in a Jewish town, tried to say that on social media today. You will be attacked because everybody knows that Jesus was a Palestinian, right? There has to be a level of fantasy in this belief system that ignores history and ignores reality in order to make this case for the Jews as colonizers in Israel. And of course, the destruction of the temple that we weep and mourn every year, 9th of Av, and read the book of Lamentations. And then about 100 years later, again, Emperor Adrian. This is my favorite Roman emperor to hate. Emperor Adrian is remembered by world historians as a very successful emperor, as somebody who was a Greekophile. He loved Roman architecture and culture, and building things and bridges and amphitheaters and art and young boys apparently. He loved everything about Roman culture, and he hated the fact that Jews reject Roman culture. And when he asked his advisors how this is, and they told him, well, there's the book they read that tells them that they're going to rebuild their temple. They still thought the temple would be rebuilt, and they have to circumcise their boys. What? Mutilate baby boys? Wow, these people are horrible. Horrible. I'm going to end it, Adrian says. I'm going to end it. How are you going to end it? Well, I'm going to make Jerusalem, the city they think they're going to rebuild, into a Roman city. I'm going to build a temple in places that they worship, and I'm going to forbid the study of Torah, and I forbid the act of circumcision. And he starts to build a Roman city in Jerusalem. Do you think it worked? It didn't. It sparked another revolt. Bar Kokhba revolt. This time, this revolt is actually quite successful at the beginning, but then Adrian gets really pissed off. They kill the whole 22nd Roman legion, and so now he sends 12 Roman legions to Jerusalem. And he kills everybody. I mean everybody. He's remembered by historians as a successful emperor. In Jewish history, Adrian is remembered as the man who's killed the most Jews in the history of Jews until Hitler. 500,000 to 700,000 Jews are murdered or killed in squashing this empire, and then all the rest who are left there are sent off to exile. Do you know why there's so many Jews all over the world? Adrian. There were Jewish communities in Rome and in Athens and in Alexandria and in Babylon. I mean, there were Jewish communities here and there, but this huge dispersion of Jews everywhere as slaves, Adrian. He also changes the name of Jerusalem to Aelia Capitolina, after himself. Aelius Trajanus Hadrianus, Imperator. That was his name. There's also Julius Caesar in there, but I left that out. And he changes the name Judea in the maps. He will erase the name Judea and rename the territory after an old enemy of the Hebrews from the Bible,
Philistines.
the Philistines. And he will call that name Provincia Palestina. That's where the name comes from. It's the Latin name for the land, an enemy of the Jews, to disassociate the Jews from Judea. There's no P in Arabic, just so you know. Really, the letter doesn't exist in the language. So this is Adrian, and that's where Palestine comes from. And after that, consecutively, the Romans, the Byzantines, the early Muslim, the late Muslim, the Crusaders, the Mamelukes, the Ottomans, the British, Jerusalem was never a capital of any of those. Any of them. Ever. Until 1948, when it became the capital of Israel. So that's the argument of colonizing the land. Because these are all colonizers. These are all colonizers. And Israel is the most amazing, magnificent, and the most miraculous case of decolonization in the history of the world. The notion of apartheid, I'm not going to play this because, again, our time is short and I see that I want to leave time for questions. Look it up. His name is Yosef Haddad. He's an Arab Israeli. He's an Arab Israeli who served in the IDF, who stands in Oxford and argues the case against the accusation of Israel as an apartheid state. How many people have been to Israel here? Great. You need to be in Israel, you know, and you'll confirm what I say. You need to be in Israel for about 5 minutes and have half a brain to look around you and see that Israel is not an apartheid state. Like really, it's not that difficult. Where Arabs, 2.5 million Arabs are Israeli citizens, and that's the.
Now, just to make one very obvious statement, You know, everybody is saying the House should vote. I hope the House will vote. As if we already don't know what the House is going to vote tonight. But you know what?
So now he goes ahead and shows different pictures of himself and of judges and doctors and all sorts of people, Arabs, prominent Arabs in Israeli society. There is a war of misinformation. All right, the war of misinformation exists. You are in it. You don't know it, but you are in it. The way the media reports about this conflict is through a very, very specific paradigm. It's a paradigm that was born after 1967 when Israel ceased to be the underdog. I know Americans love underdogs, but in the world looked at Israel, and they saw a little, poor, weak Jewish state, and they were the underdog. After 67, David and Goliath in reverse, which is a great journalistic story. And that's how this story is reported. And that paradigm fits wonderfully into the oppressor-oppressed paradigm. There's groups of oppressors and the groups of oppressed all over the world, and that's how you look at human interaction. And the Jews are the oppressor. The Jews are the successful white minority in America that climbed up and became oppressors. And Israel is their colonial oppressive state in the Middle East. Okay, this is the logic. And so whatever fits that paradigm will make it to your screen. If it doesn't fit that paradigm, it won't. All will be changed. This is an example of a Hamas member firing at people as they were coming to collect aid. That's what happened. But this is how it was reported. There was a video always. See, the video is from, it happened on the 14th, there's a video on the 15th, and this is how it was reported. Israel kills 29. Attack kills 20 as Israeli denies responsibility. Yeah, who's going to believe that? Israeli attacks. Okay, Gaza authorities say that Israel has killed those people. Sometimes it comes up as same guy. This is the same guy that made the report. Here it's 29. Here it's 6. It's the same reporter. Here's Reuters. Here it's I don't know, what is that? Yeah, the Globe and Mail. It's a Canadian. I don't know how they went down those numbers, but that's how it was reported. In Canada also, they kind of started with the Israeli denials. But that's how it's reported. This is from 10 years ago. 10 years ago. It's not new. That's one brought an old case because you think it's new because of October 7th. It's not. A terrorist moved into two Palestinians, going to a synagogue and murdered people in the morning as they were praying. And this is how the media reported it. 4 Israelis dead, 2 Palestinians in Jerusalem. Who killed them? God knows. Here, it's reported that Israeli police killed 2 after an attack. Right? That's how it's reported. These are the terrorists, by the way. And again, it goes again and again and again and again. There's never a mention of who did the killing, who is the terrorist and who is not. Terrorist attack is in brackets. Just a random, passive announcement of the New York Times that Jews were killed in Jerusalem. Nobody knows why. This is what you see. That is how you should now understand the media that comes your way. You're not really getting a description of the events. You're getting a narrative. Okay? Now, again, that's not to say that whatever Israel does is right. Israel deserves criticism, believe me. If you go to Israel and you see the demonstration once a week and you go to the Israeli elections, you'll find out that the Israelis like to criticize their government a lot. The line is crossed when that criticism becomes delegitimization of Israel. Right? When you delegitimize a country, vilify it to the extent that it becomes, in your eyes, a genocidal country, an apartheid country, a colonial country, then that country doesn't deserve to exist. Right? And so that's what we're seeing now happening on the world stage, and I hope that gives you a little bit of clarity to the events that we've been experiencing in the last year. I'm going to stop now. I'm going to allow you to, those of you who want to ask some questions.
There's one little nuance that I want to understand a little bit better, which is Palestine existed, Jews, Christians, Muslims all lived there. And then 1948 happens, and space is given specifically to Israel from Palestine, right? When does the Palestinian people become a thing?
So when we say Palestine existed, that was the name of the region.
Correct.
It existed first as the Ottoman Empire and then as a British mandate. Okay, but nobody called it that. The people who were called Palestinian were actually the Jews. My
Right.
grandfather came in 39, he was a Palestinian.
Right.
It's only after 67. After 67, the Jordanians, right, they take over, when they take over the West Bank and then withdraw in 67 back across the River Jordan, the Arabs who are left behind are now called Palestinian.
Who gave them that name?
It's homegrown. It's a self-defining group. Now, it's not fair what I just said because there are beginnings of a Palestinian national identity already in the 1930s. Okay, in the 1930s, while the British are still here, a gentleman by the name of Haj Amin al-Husseini is considered the grandfather of Palestinian national identity. They begin to construct this idea of a separate Palestinian ethnicity that's separate from all the other Arab nationalities. Right? So it's not that it never was there and then showed up after 67. It was there from the 1930s, percolating upwards. The Jordanians squashed it or quashed it as much as they could. But after 67, it starts to rise again. In the 50s and 60s, you hear it too. But in 67, that's when it really starts to gain traction, also with the help of the Soviet Union. After 67, the Soviet Union breaks away from Israel and begins the propagating this idea of Palestinian statehood and also how Zionism is racist. They are the ones that begin this whole emotion that puts these two national movements
So
head to
when they
head.
talk about that land being it belongs to the Palestinians, it doesn't belong to the Jews, we're talking about a national people less than 100 years old that are saying that.
Yes, that's correct. I am not, some people say there's no such thing as a Palestinian people. I'm not one of them. There is a Palestinian people, but there are young people. Nations are created, shared history, shared tragedy, shared identity, shared language, shared territory. Nations are created. So the Palestinian people are also a nation, but they're a young nation. Yes, sir.
You made a comment earlier about the nature, I think the word you used was Islamic, the belief system of Hamas. Was
Jihad.
Jihadism. All right. And I was thinking about that in the context of the war and Israel trying to eradicate Hamas so that October 7th wasn't happening. And I started thinking about you can eradicate the soldiers, soldiers not right, the terrorists that are part of Hamas today. But you can't eradicate an ideology.
So that's an argument that's often made. It's true. It's much harder to eradicate an idea. You can't kill an idea. You can kill people, not an idea. So my counter argument is that people kill ideas all the time. Right? We killed Nazism. Communism lost the war. Now it's not that there weren't any Nazis left, or there weren't any communists left. We're awesome people. Human history is full of ideas that have been cast away and put on the sidelines of history. It's not that that every single jihadist will be disappeared from the face of the earth. The point is that they won't have the ability to rule Gaza. And again, compared to Nazis and even Imperial Japan, after the war, we first defeated Nazism and the Japanese. Right? First there's a defeat, then there's an occupation, and then there's a de-radicalization. Without a new power taking control of the area and changing the school books and starting to de-radicalize the population, then you're absolutely right. It's not going to go away. Which is why the war cannot be the end of this process. The end of the war cannot be the end of the process. There must be a process just like Nazi Germany, just like Japan, of de-radicalization and then a financial investment. And Israel is not the country that can do this by herself. That's why we need the help of the Egyptians and the Emiratis and the Saudis and the Western world and anybody else who would help. We don't see that right now on the horizon. The hope that I do have is that if and when Iran collapses and we see a new free government in Iran, that will motivate the other Arab countries now to step in and de-radicalize the Palestinian population in Gaza. It's a long shot, it's a slim hope, but it's a hope nevertheless. Yes, ma'am.
To that point about Iran, you talked about how there's the narrative that there's Hamas, but the people of Gaza don't want that. But then there's the data that show that they voted in Iran. When it's talked about, you hear about the Islamic regime,
That's right.
and then the
people.
Iranian people.
That's right.
How do we know that the Iranian
So
people?
there's data on that too. It's not public polls, but we know that Iran, the population in Iran, is very much against their government. Now Iran is controlled, the regime, because this is how oppressive regimes work. They have the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, okay, which is the radicalized Islamic military force, stronger than the Iranian army, by the way, that are the boot of the Iranian government. But we also know of a great deal of subversive movements, of a young generation that's trying to have parties underground and flaunt and even drink alcohol and listen to Western media and social media and are consuming of Western values against their government. So we can say, different from the Palestinian population, that when it comes to Iran, we do see a difference between the Iranian regime and the Iranian population. And then also remember that the Iranian population is not homogeneous. But 1/3 of Iran are Arab. Most of Iranians are Persian. But there's 1/3 of an Arab minority. There's a Baluchi minority. There's a Kurdish minority. Right? So there are lots of groups who are not natural allies of the Shiite clerics, and so there is potential that they will rise up, especially when the government is now weak and humiliated. There's potential. We're looking at a window of potential that might cause them to rise up and topple the government. And if you ask me, that's really the only realistic move forward.
Well, thank you very much for this. Really good. One of the more surprising things in this country to the reaction of October 7th was what happened on college campuses in the U.S. And in particular, there's always been protests and things throughout history, I guess. But this time it seemed extremely organized, and there were kids who on October 6th couldn't have picked out Israel on a map of the world.
That's right.
Put a pen on it. But this time, it seemed like, as soon as the hostilities began, they had, Hamas flags, gear, chants, slogans that, it all seemed like there was an organization underneath that seemed to pull together various strange groups that shouldn't belong together into a very organized set of protests around this country, which I think for all of us was a big shock. Have you investigated, looked into what was the underlying group that funded this, that organized it? Because again, it's not, the kids are too uninformed to, I think, have gotten to that point. Who pulled the strings?
So I hope, first of all, hope that the FBI is doing that investigation, and it's not something that I need to do. But from what we know, it's not new. This has been going on for a long time. There is very strong influence of different Islamic groups and countries in American campuses. Qatar is the leading one, but not only. There are a lot of groups that are fundraising for Hamas and Hezbollah around the United States. They are associated with different Muslim organizations. Some of them are recognized as terror-supporting organizations and are outlawed, and some of them are not. You're right that it was organized, it was prepared. They have the slogans ready, they have the signs ready, they had the social media already, right? There are posts that go back. I remember the early days of the war, They showed social media posts from 6:15 a.m. on the 7th. Right, this is a quarter of an hour, 14 minutes before the beginning of the attack. There are already social media posts that how Israel is destroying homes in Gaza. Right? I lost my home. The Israelis took everything I had. This is 15 minutes before they even begin the attack. So it's all prepared. It's all was already ready to launch with the click of a finger. It has to do, and that's something that's very important to investigate. Where is this money coming from? We know that Qatar has strong influence in a lot of college campuses in the United States. A lot of Ivy League universities set up Middle East study programs and scholarships for students from abroad and professorships for visiting teachers and even tenured professors who are on that payroll. So that's something very important to investigate. So, but I agree with you, it's something we should do. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any information or update of where the hostage negotiations stand? Because the hostage families are wanting a ceasefire immediately and out what the issues are with that.
So there has been a movement in the hostage negotiations in the last 2 weeks, starting November 27th. November 27th is when the ceasefire with Lebanon was signed, and Hamas found itself alone. One of the wins of this ceasefire is that Israel was able to de-link the Hezbollah and the northern front from Gaza. Once Hamas found themselves all alone, they are much more pressured to negotiate. The second element that made a big difference is the president-elect's tweet that he's going to rain hellfire on Hamas if they don't release the hostages. And that, I think, motivated them or made them understand that they need to make headway with the hostages. And so that's where we're looking at now. I don't know exactly where that is going. Nobody knows. There are actually surprisingly no leaks, which is a good thing. But they're talking about a interim agreement, not a end of the war agreement. So like in Lebanon, 60 days, ceasefire, Israel pulls out of some of the territory, and the A list of hostages, which is the women and the elderly and the injured, who will be released in the first round. But there's also rumors about a everybody for everybody agreement. And so, which means they'll bring all the hostages with all the prisoners in Israel and do a swap. I don't know. I hope it's the latter, not the former, so we don't stretch out the agony of the families even longer. But if there is a chance there's a feeling that this is the best window of opportunity for a hostage release deal in the near future, before Trump takes office. So that's the idea. It's your guess is as good as mine if that will actually pan out, but that's what we're looking at. The pressure in Israel is growing beyond belief. The hostage families, and now Netanyahu is also feeling it because a lot of the hostage families in the past supported Netanyahu are now speaking vocally against him. He doesn't like that, and so we're looking at maybe a speeding up of that process. Okay, you've been very patient. Thank you very much. If anybody would like to support the work that I do, I'm coming back to the States in March. I always need people to help me do this more, to get in front of more people. You can look at the QR code if you want to support this work and get information out to more people. I'll be very, very much appreciated. So thank you very much.
This is great, guys. Thank you.
Also, feel free to use me as a resource. My cards are on the table outside. If you have questions about Israel, about the news, and want to ask more questions, feel free to email me.
Yeah.
website, so look at that. Yeah, I have the genocide.
I know, yes, I know there's so much to cover.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish I had told Jay about it. I think he would have.
It was got lost in translation, you know, maybe he didn't see it.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Next time.
Thank you.
Bye, thanks for
We'll
coming,
talk.
guys. Okay.